Howdy, ESSM406. Welcome to video lecture number 4. This is going to be the introduction to the policy process. So we're just going to give some brief ideas about what the key ideas are that regard policy analysis and how do we understand the policy process. So what do we mean by policy? So this is really covered very well in the 3 readings you have for Unit 1. For instance, Birkeland points out that there are many different definitions. But for this course, what we're going to use is policy are authoritative decisions about who gets what, where, when, and how. So public policy is for everyone. It's for society at large. But then there's also private policies like in your house or your dorm room, what hours you need to keep. Those kind of things are also policies. So we need to think about these policies in a different way when we talk about public policy, and we're going to give you the conceptual tools to do that. So how are policies made? Well, policies are made through political processes, and this is really, really important. So one of the parts of policy that's quite different than science is that there's not always a right answer. Policy is made through politics. It's made through power, argument, and conflict. Even if we can prove that our policy is better, it may not be chosen due to politics. So political processes don't necessarily lead to optimal outcomes. For example, if we look at the healthcare policy that just passed, there's really no authoritative end to policymaking. So one thing to think about is our values and how important our values are. So Laser really stressed this in her chapter. And she also talks about who are the major actors. So values are very important because all the actors are going to have different values. For example, in our healthcare reform, some people think it's morally wrong that poor people don't have access to healthcare. Other people think it's morally wrong that the government interferes with private markets. So neither of these are analytical points. We can't say if it would be optimal if the government didn't interfere in healthcare markets. There's lots of examples where our government can be good for healthcare. If we look at Canada and Europe, a lot of those markets are highly dependent on the government. They have lower costs and similar outcomes. So maybe to those people, government healthcare is optimal, but we're not really going to go into the analysis of healthcare analysts, so we're not saying that. But perhaps here in the U.S., there's a lot of people that feel it's against their values for the government to be giving money to people for their healthcare. So this is not necessarily an argument about what's right. It's about how policies are formed. So like believing in freedom of speech, all these different things are values. Where does that begin and end? That's all part of public policy making. The other thing that's really important is structure. Structure matters. There's lots of evidence from studying this in the legislature about who is sitting at the table, and the order that decision options are given have a huge influence. So you will often see that the place where decisions are made change. So if we look at a federal decision versus a state decision, there's going to be differences there. Values between smaller and larger governments will also lead to different outcomes. So, for example, in the 1950s, Texas and other southern states had racial segregation. One of the ways it was eliminated is when the federal government came in and said that states cannot make decisions, and the federal government stepped in and imposed the law on the states. So that's one of the examples when the structure matters. So in this course, we're going to really focus on learning conceptual tools for thinking about policies. And we're going to focus on it from an institutionalist perspective. So this will lead to an analysis of where there will be right and wrong answers to what I'm asking you, but it's not right and wrong policy. So we're going to discuss analytical tools for thinking about the relative merits of policies. And you can disagree about the implication of these policies, and that's totally legitimate. And you may think it's morally wrong for one or morally wrong for the other. But what I want you to focus on in this class is thinking about the policy and how it's made and the structure of arguments you can use in your writing to talk about policy. So remember, there's no really correct policy. That policy is a political process. And so our next lecture is going to be about the dangers of studying policy process.